quiet rancher saw his maid limping. What he did next shook the sheriff's office. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. On a quiet ranch nestled in the sprawling plains of the American West, there lived a man named Samuel. Samuel had chosen a life of solitude after the harsh winds of life had taken much from him. He was a man of few words, a rancher who lived in the shadows of the mountains, away from the bustling towns and the endless chatter of people. His house was simple, the barn sturdy, and his days were spent tending to the land. For years, he had no need for much company. But there was one person who entered his life and became his quiet companion, his maid, Sarah. She was a quiet young woman, with dark hair that always seemed to fall in front of her eyes, hiding the deep thoughts within. Samuel never asked about her past, just as she never asked about his. She worked hard, keeping the house in order, cooking meals, and helping with the chores. Samuel had hired her in a time of need, when his old cook had left for greener pastures, and Sarah had come with little more than a suitcase and a determined look in her eyes. But today, something was different. Samuel was walking towards the barn when he noticed Sarah. She was limping badly, her right leg dragging as she moved slowly toward the house. At first, Samuel thought it might just be a minor injury, something that would heal with rest. But the way she moved, carefully placing one foot in front of the other, told him it was more than just a scrape. He paused for a moment, unsure whether to approach her or not. He had always been a man of action, but he had never been good with emotions, never good at comforting others. Yet, something about Sarah's struggle stirred something in him. He could not ignore it. He walked up to her, his boots crunching against the dry earth, and spoke softly. "Sarah, what happened to you?" She looked up at him, her face pale, but she quickly lowered her eyes again, trying to hide the pain. "It's nothing, Mr. Samuel," she said in a strained voice. "Just a little fall. I'll be fine." But Samuel saw the way she winced with each step, the way her shoulders were hunched in pain. He could see through her attempt to mask the truth. Without thinking, he reached out, gently taking her arm to steady her. "Come inside. Let me take a look at that leg," he said, his voice gruff but kind. Sarah hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether to argue, but then nodded quietly. Together, they walked toward the house. Samuel helped her sit down in the small living room by the fire, where he could finally get a good look at the injury. It was worse than he had imagined. Her leg was swollen, and there were signs of bruising already starting to form. It looked like she had fallen and hurt herself while working outside. Samuel's hands were rough from years of ranching, but they were gentle as he helped her remove her boot, revealing the full extent of the damage. He cursed under his breath, realizing this would take longer to heal than he had hoped. Sarah's face remained calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She was trying to hide the pain, trying to be strong, but Samuel could see it in the way her body trembled slightly. He paused, unsure what to do next. This was more than just a simple injury. He felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest as he watched her. In the silence of the room, it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. He had been alone for so long, and now he was faced with someone who needed his help, someone who had relied on him for so long, even without asking. Samuel let out a long breath and stood up. "I'll go get some bandages," he said. As he walked to the small cabinet, his mind raced. This wasn't just about tending to a simple wound. This was about something deeper, something he had long since buried within himself, something that he could no longer ignore. He wasn't just helping her because it was the right thing to do. He was doing it because, in that moment, he realized he cared more about Sarah than he had ever allowed himself to admit. Little did he know, this act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. As Samuel carefully wrapped the bandages around Sarah's swollen ankle, he couldn't help but notice the stillness in the room. There was a certain quiet in the air, a weight that felt heavier than it should be. Sarah sat motionless, her head slightly lowered as she avoided his gaze. Samuel knew she was hiding something. For a brief moment, he wondered if she was just ashamed of needing help, but deep down, he sensed that it was more than that. Her silence was not just about the injury. It was about something deeper, something she was holding back. He finished securing the bandage and helped her settle into a comfortable chair by the fire. The glow of the flames flickered across her face, casting shadows on her features, but Samuel could still see the subtle tension in her posture. It was clear that whatever pain she was hiding was more than just physical. He couldn't ignore it. His instincts kicked in, and without thinking, he spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Sarah, what's going on? You've been distant lately. If there's something you need to say, you can tell me." She glanced up at him, her dark eyes revealing a glimpse of the turmoil she had kept buried. She bit her lip, struggling to find the right words. Samuel waited patiently, not pressing her, but not letting her retreat into silence either. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't want to worry you, Mr. Samuel. It's just, there are people looking for me. People I'm afraid of." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected those words, and they sent a chill down his spine. He sat down across from her, his mind racing. Who's after you?" Sarah hesitated again, clearly torn between trust and fear. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "They're from a gang, a group of outlaws. They've been after me ever since my father. He got into trouble with them. He tried to protect me, but they—" She trailed off, her voice breaking, and for the first time, Samuel saw tears in her eyes. It hit him hard. This wasn't just some ordinary feud or family drama. These were dangerous people, dangerous enough to be hunting Sarah, someone who had only ever shown kindness to him. Samuel felt a wave of protectiveness rise within him. He had always prided himself on his ability to handle tough situations, but this felt different. He had never faced something like this before. He needed to protect Sarah. There was no question about that. But what could he do? How could he protect her from a group of outlaws who clearly had no regard for anyone's life? As if on cue, a loud knock at the door startled them both. Sarah's eyes went wide with fear, and Samuel's instincts immediately kicked in. He stood up, walking briskly to the door, careful not to make a sound. He peeked through the crack, and his heart sank. There, standing in the doorway, were two men on horseback, rough-looking, with hard eyes and weapons clearly visible. They didn't look like people you could reason with. Samuel's mind raced. He needed to act fast. There was no time to hesitate. He turned back to Sarah, his face hardening with resolve. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and commanding. "I'll handle this." But Sarah reached out and grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "No, please, don't go. They'll kill you. You don't understand. They're not just outlaws. They're worse than that. They'll stop at nothing." Her voice cracked with fear, but Samuel could see the truth in her eyes. He couldn't leave her to face this alone. Without another word, he grabbed his rifle from the wall and walked to the door. The men outside were still waiting, but now Samuel was ready. He wasn't going to let them take her. Not after everything she had done for him. As he stepped outside, he felt the weight of the decision he had just made. There was no turning back now. Sarah was right. These men were not ordinary outlaws, and this was not going to be an easy fight. But Samuel wasn't afraid. He had been through worse. And he wasn't about to let anyone hurt Sarah, not on his watch. Samuel stepped out onto the porch, the cool evening air hitting his face as he gripped his rifle tightly. His heart raced, not from fear, but from determination. He wasn't about to let anyone harm Sarah, not on his watch. The two men outside were still waiting, their horses tethered loosely by the fence. They hadn't moved, but Samuel could feel their eyes on him, sizing him up. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This wasn't just about protecting Sarah. It was about standing up for what was right. He couldn't let fear control him now. He walked towards the men, his boots crunching the dry earth with each step. As he got closer, the two men finally spoke, their voices low and threatening. "We know she's here," the first man said, a sneer on his face. "You'd be wise to hand her over, old man. We don't want any trouble." Samuel stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he looked at them. "I'm not handing anyone over," he said, his voice steady. "This is my land, and you're not welcome here." The men exchanged a quick glance, and the second one, a larger man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "You don't understand, do you? This isn't about your land. This is about a debt that needs to be paid." Samuel's grip on his rifle tightened, but he didn't say anything. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The men were here for Sarah, and he wasn't going to let them take her. "You don't know what she's done," the scarred man continued, his voice lower now, as if trying to reason with him. She's a liability, and we're the ones who clean up the mess. Just let us take her, and no one gets hurt. Samuel didn't flinch. He knew exactly what kind of men these were. Outlaws, thieves, the kind of men who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. He had dealt with them before, and he wasn't about to let them walk all over him now. She's not going anywhere, he said firmly, raising his rifle just slightly. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. The silence that followed was heavy, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the only thing breaking the stillness. The two men sized him up, and for a moment, Samuel thought they might back down. But the scarred man just grinned, a cold, twisted smile that sent a shiver down Samuel's spine. So be it, he muttered, pulling out a knife and advancing towards him. Samuel's hand moved instinctively to the rifle, but before he could react, the first man lunged at him, his fists aiming for Samuel's chest. Samuel sidestepped quickly, using the momentum to bring the butt of his rifle down on the man's back, sending him crashing to the ground. The second man, still holding his knife, came at him with a fury. Samuel barely had time to raise the rifle in defense as the man slashed at him, the blade missing his side by mere inches. Samuel swung the rifle like a club, knocking the knife from the man's hand and sending him stumbling back. The fight was over quickly. The two men were on the ground, groaning in pain, and Samuel stood over them, breathing heavily. He didn't want to kill them. He just wanted them to leave. But as the men slowly got to their feet, their eyes filled with rage, Samuel knew this wasn't over. The scarred man wiped blood from his mouth and sneered. You may have won this time, old man, he said, backing away slowly. But we'll be back. And next time, there will be more of us. With that, the two men turned and left, their horses trotting quickly as they disappeared into the distance. Samuel watched them go, his heart still pounding in his chest. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, Sarah was safe. He turned and walked back into the house, his thoughts racing. He knew this was just the beginning. The outlaws would be back, and next time, there might be more of them. But Samuel wasn't afraid. He had faced worse, and he was ready to fight for what mattered. Inside, Sarah was waiting, her face pale with fear. But as she looked at him, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Hope. She didn't say anything, but her gratitude was clear. Samuel nodded to her, silently telling her that she was safe for now. But deep down, he knew that the danger wasn't over. He would have to protect her, no matter what it took. And if that meant facing down a whole gang of outlaws, then that's exactly what he would do. The days that followed the encounter with the outlaws were tense. Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that they were far from safe, and he knew. Sarah felt the same. The two of them worked side by side during the day, but there was a silence between them, an unspoken understanding of the danger that lingered just outside their door. Samuel's mind kept returning to the night he had stood face to face with the two men. They were not ordinary criminals. There was something more about them, something deep and dangerous. Every time he stepped out into the open, his senses were on high alert. He couldn't afford to be careless. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed lost in her own thoughts. She moved about the house quietly, tending to the chores as she always did, but Samuel could tell something was weighing on her. She had been through so much already, and he knew there was more to her story than she had told him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Sarah finally spoke up. They were sitting on the porch, the air crisp and cool as the night settled in. Samuel had just finished repairing a broken fence post when she quietly approached him. Samuel, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something I need to tell you. Something I've been running from for a long time. Samuel paused, setting his tools aside. He turned to face her, his expression serious but soft. He could see the fear in her eyes, the weight of her words hanging in the air. He knew this moment had been coming, but he wasn't prepared for what she would say. I didn't just run from them, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. I ran from my own family, from my tribe. My father, he was the chief, but he made a deal with the wrong people, and it cost him everything. I was supposed to marry a man I didn't love, a man who was dangerous. I couldn't do it. So I ran. Samuel's heart sank. The weight of her words settled heavily in the space between them. He had known there was more to her story, but hearing it from her mouth made it all the more real. She had run from her own people, her own past, to find a place where she could breathe freely. He could feel the sorrow in her voice, the burden she carried. I didn't want to bring this danger here, Sarah said, her eyes brimming with tears. I thought if I kept running, I could outrun it. But I can't. And now you're in danger because of me. Samuel reached out, taking her hand in his. He squeezed it gently, his voice firm but reassuring. Sarah, you didn't ask for this. You didn't bring this danger here. I did what I had to do to protect you, and I'd do it again. You're not alone anymore. For the first time in days, Sarah allowed herself to cry, her shoulders shaking with the weight of everything she had been carrying. Samuel stayed by her side, not saying a word, but offering the comfort of his presence. The night stretched on, and the two of them sat in silence, the stars above shining bright against the dark sky. Samuel knew this wasn't over. The men who had come for her before would come again. But he also knew he would stand by her, no matter what. The next morning, as the sun rose over the ranch, Samuel made a decision. He would go into town. He needed to find out more about these men, the gang that had been hunting Sarah. He needed to understand what he was up against before it was too late. He couldn't let Sarah face this alone. As he saddled his horse and prepared to leave, Sarah came to him, her eyes filled with worry. You don't have to do this, she said softly. You don't owe me anything. Samuel met her gaze, his voice steady. I know what it's like to be alone. I won't leave you to fight this by yourself. I'll find a way to end this. I promise you. With that, he mounted his horse and rode off toward town, the sound of his horse's hooves echoing in the quiet morning. As the dust rose behind him, Sarah stood at the edge of the porch, watching him go. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. Samuel had made a promise, and she believed he would keep it. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Sarah didn't feel like she was running anymore. And that, in itself, was a victory. Samuel rode hard through the morning mist, the sound of his horse's hooves beating steadily against the earth. His mind raced with thoughts of what he might find in town. He had to gather information, had to understand who these men were, what they wanted, and how he could stop them from bringing any more harm to Sarah. As he passed the rolling hills, the familiar sight of the small town came into view. The dusty streets, the old saloon on the corner, and the general store where everyone gathered to gossip. Nothing had changed. But Samuel's heart was heavy. He wasn't just here to get supplies or catch up with old friends. He was here to confront a threat, one that had followed Sarah for far too long. He tied his horse up outside the general store and walked in. The bell above the door jingled, and the few patrons inside turned their heads, nodding politely in recognition. Samuel gave them a brief nod, but didn't stop to chat. He made his way to the counter where the storekeeper, Mr. Thompson, stood, wiping his hands on a rag. Morning, Samuel. What can I get for you today? Mr. Thompson asked with a smile. Samuel's face was serious, his tone more direct than usual. I need information, Thompson, about a group of men. They're dangerous, and I need to know where they're hiding out. Thompson raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. Dangerous, you say? You've been keeping to yourself up there on your ranch for a while now. What's going on? Samuel leaned in, lowering his voice. They're after a woman I'm protecting, and I'm going to make sure they don't get her. Mr. Thompson studied him for a moment, then sighed. I know the men you're talking about. They've been around for years. They're part of a gang led by a man named Elias Klein. They've been causing trouble for anyone who gets in their way. Samuel clenched his fists at the mention of the name. Elias Klein was known for being ruthless, a man who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who crossed him. He had his fingers in all kinds of illegal dealings, from cattle rustling to extortion. The last thing Samuel wanted was to be in the middle of a fight with a man like that. Where can I find them? Samuel asked, his voice low but steady. I wouldn't go looking for them. If I were you, Samuel, Thompson warned, his expression darkening. They're not the type of men you can reason with. They'll kill you without a second thought. Samuel didn't flinch. I'm not asking to reason with them. I'm asking where they're hiding. Thompson hesitated, then sighed again. There's an old cabin out by Deadwood Creek. I've seen Klein's men head that way more than once. But I'm telling you, Samuel, this is a dangerous game. You won't win if you go up against them alone. Samuel stood up straight, his resolve hardening. I'm not alone. Thompson looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If you're set on it, then be careful. And watch your back. They'll come for you if they know you're looking for them. Samuel thanked him and left the store, his mind made up. He wasn't backing down. He had made a promise to Sarah, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him from keeping it. As he walked back to his horse, he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was closer than he had thought. He had no idea what he would face when he reached Deadwood Creek, but he was prepared to fight. He had no choice. He mounted his horse and set off toward the creek, his heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The sun was high in the sky now, and the journey was long. Samuel rode through the day, the landscape shifting as he moved farther from the familiar roads of his ranch. The land grew wild and untamed, the hills steep and rugged. Deadwood Creek was on the edge of the mountains, a place few ventured unless they had to. It was a place of shadows, where the law didn't reach. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the valley, Samuel finally arrived. The cabin was just as Thompson had described it, old, abandoned, and surrounded by overgrown trees. Samuel dismounted and approached cautiously, his senses heightened. He could feel the weight of the silence around him, the air thick with tension. He knew they were here, hiding just out of sight, watching his every move. As he stepped closer to the cabin, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall and wiry, with a scar running down his cheek. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes told Samuel everything he needed to know. The gang was here, and they weren't going to let him leave without a fight. Samuel rode hard through the morning mist, the sound of his horse's hooves beating steadily against the earth. His mind raced with thoughts of what he might find in town. He had to gather information, had to understand who these men were, what they wanted, and how he could stop them from bringing any more harm to Sarah. As he passed the rolling hills, the familiar sight of the small town came into view. The dusty streets, the old saloon on the corner, and the general store where everyone gathered to gossip. Nothing had changed. But Samuel's heart was heavy. He wasn't just here to get supplies or catch up with old friends. He was here to confront a threat, one that had followed Sarah for far too long. He tied his horse up outside the general store and walked in. The bell above the door jingled, and the few patrons inside turned their heads, nodding politely in recognition. Samuel gave them a brief nod, but didn't stop to chat. He made his way to the counter where the storekeeper, Mr. Thompson, stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, Samuel. What can I get for you today?" Mr. Thompson asked with a smile. Samuel's face was serious, his tone more direct than usual. "I need information, Thompson, about a group of men. They're dangerous, and I need to know where they're hiding out." Thompson raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. "Dangerous, you say? You've been keeping to yourself up there on your ranch for a while now. What's going on?" Samuel leaned in, lowering his voice. "They're after a woman I'm protecting, and I'm going to make sure they don't get her." Mr. Thompson studied him for a moment, then sighed. "I know the men you're talking about. They've been around for years. They're part of a gang led by a man named Elias Klein. They've been causing trouble for anyone who gets in their way." Samuel clenched his fists at the mention of the name. Elias Klein was known for being ruthless, a man who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who crossed him. He had his fingers in all kinds of illegal dealings, from cattle rustling to extortion. The last thing Samuel wanted was to be in the middle of a fight with a man like that. "Where can I find them?" Samuel asked, his voice low but steady. "I wouldn't go looking for them if I were you, Samuel," Thompson warned, his expression darkening. "They're not the type of men you can reason with. They'll kill you without a second thought." Samuel didn't flinch. "I'm not asking to reason with them. I'm asking where they're hiding." Thompson hesitated, then sighed again. "There's an old cabin out by Deadwood Creek. I've seen Klein's men head that way more than once. But I'm telling you, Samuel, this is a dangerous game. You won't win if you go up against them alone." Samuel stood up straight, his resolve hardening. "I'm not alone." Thompson looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you're set on it, then be careful. And watch your back. They'll come for you if they know you're looking for them." Samuel thanked him and left the store, his mind made up. He wasn't backing down. He had made a promise to Sarah, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him from keeping it. As he walked back to his horse, he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was closer than he had thought. He had no idea what he would face when he reached Deadwood Creek, but he was prepared to fight. He had no choice. He mounted his horse and set off toward the creek, his heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The sun was high in the sky now, and the journey was long. Samuel rode through the day, the landscape shifting as he moved farther from the familiar roads of his ranch. The land grew wild and untamed, the hills steep and rugged. Deadwood Creek was on the edge of the mountains, a place few ventured unless they had to. It was a place of shadows, where the law didn't reach. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the valley, Samuel finally arrived. The cabin was just as Thompson had described it, old, abandoned, and surrounded by overgrown trees. Samuel dismounted and approached cautiously, his senses heightened. He could feel the weight of the silence around him, the air thick with tension. He knew they were here, hiding just out of sight, watching his every move. As he stepped closer to the cabin, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall and wiry, with a scar running down his cheek. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes told Samuel everything he needed to know. The gang was here, and they weren't going to let him leave without a fight. Samuel stood his ground, the weight of the rifle in his hands feeling like a lifeline. The man with the scar across his cheek stepped closer, his eyes cold and calculating. Samuel didn't flinch, though every instinct told him this was about to escalate into a violent confrontation. The silence between them hung heavy in the air, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling the leaves around the cabin. For a moment, Samuel considered backing down, thinking of Sarah and what this could mean for her. But then he remembered his promise. He couldn't turn back now. "You're looking for trouble, old man," the scarred man said, his voice rough and low. "This place isn't for the faint of heart. You should have stayed away." Samuel's gaze never wavered. "I'm here for her," he said simply, his voice firm, knowing exactly who and what he was standing up against. "I'm not leaving without her." The man sneered, taking another step forward, but just as he did, there was a soft rustling from the brush behind Samuel. He spun around instinctively, his hand ready to raise his rifle, but before he could react, another figure emerged from the shadows. A second man, his expression grim, a rifle in his hands. "We don't take kindly to trespassers," the new man said, his voice cutting through the tension. Samuel's heart raced, but he kept his composure. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched. He could handle this. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Samuel replied, his grip tightening on his rifle. "I just want to make sure no one hurts her." The two men exchanged a glance, and the scarred man let out a low laugh. "Her? You're talking about the girl, aren't you? She's the reason we're here. She's been running from us for far too long. And now, it's time for her to pay for what she's done." Samuel felt his blood run cold. He didn't know what Sarah had gotten herself into, but whatever it was serious. He wasn't about to let these men have their way. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect her," Samuel said, his voice unwavering. The second man stepped forward, aiming his rifle directly at Samuel's chest. "I don't think you understand. You don't get to make the rules here. We do. And if you want to walk away from this, I suggest you drop your weapon and leave." Samuel stood tall, unyielding. "I'm not leaving without her." The tension in the air thickened, the two men circling him like predators preparing to strike. But just as the scarred man raised his hand, signaling for them to attack, a third voice called out from behind. "That's enough." The two men froze, and Samuel turned to see a figure emerging from the cabin, her silhouette framed by the dim light inside. "Sarah." She stepped forward, her presence commanding, her face set with determination. "I'm the one you're looking for," she said, her voice steady and strong. The men turned to her, surprised. "Sarah," the scarred man growled, his tone dripping with anger. "You should have stayed gone. Now you've brought trouble to this place." Sarah stood tall, her eyes cold and unwavering. "I didn't bring trouble here. You did. And you're not going to take anything from me." The two men exchanged a look, confusion flickering across their faces. "What are you talking about?" the second man asked. "You're just a girl." Sarah smiled, a dark glint in her eyes. "I'm more than just a girl," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm the one who's going to end this." Samuel watched as Sarah walked past him, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. She moved with confidence, like someone who had long ago accepted the weight of her past and was finally ready to face it. The two men didn't move. They were still processing what Sarah had said, but Samuel knew this wasn't going to end well for them. She had just turned the tables. She was no longer a helpless woman on the run. She was someone with power, someone who had the ability to take control of her destiny. The scarred man's face twisted with rage as he raised his rifle, ready to strike. But before he could pull the trigger, Sarah turned, her hand raised. "Don't," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The men hesitated. The power she exuded was undeniable. "I told you," she said calmly. "This ends now." The second man lowered his rifle, his expression uncertain. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew he didn't want to be on the wrong side of Sarah's resolve. Samuel watched in awe as Sarah stepped forward, her gaze locking with the scarred man's. "Leave," she said, her voice carrying the finality of a judge passing sentence. "If you leave now, I won't make you regret it. But if you stay, you'll wish you hadn't." The scarred man looked at his partner, his eyes filled with rage, but he saw the same hesitation in the other man's eyes. Slowly, reluctantly, they both lowered their weapons. With a last, resentful glare, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Samuel stood still, watching as they left. His heart was still pounding, but he knew that the battle had been won. For now, at least. Sarah walked back toward him, her expression calm but resolute. "It's over," she said simply. Samuel nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. The men would be back. There was no escaping that. But for tonight, they had won. And that was enough. The days after the confrontation with the outlaws were quiet, but the peace felt temporary, as if the storm had merely paused before returning with greater force. Samuel and Sarah spent their time repairing the damage from the previous attack, reinforcing the ranch's defenses, and preparing for whatever came next. But there was something in the air that made it clear their troubles were far from over. Samuel had grown used to solitude, to life on the ranch where he had everything he needed, but with Sarah now in his life, everything had changed. She wasn't just the maid, the quiet woman he had hired out of necessity. She had become something more, someone worth fighting for. The sense of dread that had settled in his chest didn't ease. The weight of Sarah's past hung over them both. As much as he tried to protect her, he knew that the real battle was yet to come. Samuel couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the outlaws would return. They had already made their intentions clear. Sarah was their target, and no amount of time or distance would change that. The silence was the calm before the storm. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the fields, Samuel sat outside the cabin, watching the distant horizon. He had learned to read the signs of nature, to feel the changes in the air before they came. Tonight, the wind felt different, heavy with tension, like the land itself was holding its breath. Sarah joined him, standing silently beside him as she looked out over the land. They had not spoken much about what had happened or the danger that was still out there. Neither of them wanted to acknowledge the fact that they were both waiting for the inevitable. Samuel finally spoke, his voice low. "You're safe for now, but I know they'll be back. And when they come, we won't be ready unless we prepare." Sarah nodded, but said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. She knew it was true. There was no escaping the past, no running from the men who sought her out. "I'll go into town tomorrow," Samuel continued, his tone firm. "I'll gather what we need. If they want to fight, they'll get one. But we need to be ready. We can't afford to wait any longer." Sarah turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I don't want you to do this," she said quietly. "You've done more than enough. You've already risked everything for me. I don't want to drag you any further into my mess." Samuel reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "You didn't drag me into anything, Sarah. I made my choice. I promised to protect you, and that's what I'm going to do. We're in this together." For a moment, Sarah's eyes softened, and she squeezed his hand in return. But there was a sadness in her gaze, a fear she couldn't hide. She had already lost so much, and now, with Samuel's help, she was on the brink of losing everything again. The next day, Samuel rode into town, his mind focused on the task at hand. The townspeople greeted him with polite nods, but Samuel knew they had heard the rumors. The outlaws had been active for years, leaving a trail of violence and destruction in their wake. People whispered about them in hushed tones, afraid to speak their names aloud. But Samuel wasn't afraid. He had made up his mind to face them, to stand firm and protect what mattered. As he approached the sheriff's office, his gut tightened. He had never been one to rely on the law, but in this case, he knew he couldn't fight alone. He needed all the help he could get. The sheriff, a gruff man with a weathered face, looked up as Samuel entered. "What can I do for you, Samuel?" the sheriff asked, his voice cautious. Samuel didn't waste any time. "I need information on Elias Klein and his gang. They're coming for me, and they're coming for her. I want to know everything you can tell me about them. Where they're hiding, how many men they have, and what I'm up against." The sheriff hesitated, glancing out the window as if he expected someone to be listening. "Klein's a dangerous man, Samuel. He's not someone you can just run off. He's got ties, connections. You'd be better off staying out of it." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "I don't have a choice. I can't let him harm her. I won't." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his temples. "I've been hearing whispers of Klein's men in the hills near Deadwood Creek. But that's all I can tell you. The rest is too dangerous, even for me." Samuel nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. He wasn't just fighting Klein and his gang. He was up against a force much larger than he had anticipated. But he couldn't back down now. He owed Sarah too much. As he left the sheriff's office, the weight of his next steps pressed down on him. There was no turning back. He was about to face the gang that had terrorized the region for years, and he had no idea what awaited him. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let them take Sarah without a fight. And this time, he was going to be ready. As Samuel prepared for the final showdown, he knew there was no going back. The information from the sheriff had pointed him to Deadwood Creek, a place where the outlaws were said to be hiding. But Samuel wasn't just going to walk in unprepared. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He had Sarah to protect, and after everything that had happened, he knew that this was their last chance. If they didn't take action now, the gang would come for them again. And next time, they might not be so lucky. He spent the night gathering his supplies, ammunition, food, and whatever else he thought they might need. Sarah offered to help, but Samuel insisted that she stay back. He didn't want her anywhere near the danger that was coming. She didn't argue, though the sadness in her eyes was clear. She had never wanted him to fight her battles, but she knew it was too late for that. The next morning, Samuel set out for Deadwood Creek, the sun barely rising over the horizon. The journey was long, but the weight of his mission pushed him forward. As he rode through the open plains, he couldn't shake the feeling that the end was near. He wasn't sure what he would find when he reached the creek, but he knew he would have to be ready for anything. When he finally arrived, the place looked just as desolate as he had imagined. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the distant rush of water. The creek, once a peaceful spot, now felt like the calm before the storm. Samuel dismounted and surveyed the area carefully, listening for any signs of movement. He didn't know how many men Klein had with him, but he knew that taking them head-on would be a mistake. He needed a plan. He crouched low to the ground, moving slowly toward the cabin where the outlaws were holed up. He could hear voices now, muffled by the distance, but there was no mistaking the sound of boots shuffling and the low murmur of conversation. Samuel's pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. This was it. The time for hesitation was over. He crept closer, careful to stay out of sight. He needed to get close enough to strike without being seen. As he approached the cabin, he saw the men, 6 of them, all heavily armed and looking more dangerous than ever. They were standing around a fire, talking in hushed tones, unaware of Samuel's presence. He had the element of surprise, and he wasn't going to waste it. Samuel took a deep breath and steadied his hand on the rifle. He had been in situations like this before, but the stakes had never been higher. He had never fought for something more important than this. Sarah, his promise to her, his reason for standing here, facing down a gang of ruthless men. With one final glance at the cabin, Samuel moved quickly, rushing toward the closest man and taking him down with a swift, quiet strike. The others reacted instantly, reaching for their weapons, but Samuel was faster. He fired a shot into the air, hoping to confuse them, to throw them off balance. It worked. For a moment, the men hesitated, giving Samuel just enough time to take cover behind a rock. Gunfire erupted, and chaos ensued. Samuel moved swiftly, taking out 2 more men before they could even raise their rifles. His heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he didn't stop. He had to finish this. The remaining 3 men, realizing they were losing, scrambled for cover. But Samuel was already ahead of them, moving with the precision of someone who had fought this battle in his mind 1,000 times. He didn't hesitate. One by one, he took down the remaining men, his shots precise, his movements swift. The fight was over in a matter of minutes. The gang that had terrorized the land for so long was no more. Samuel stood in the aftermath, his breath heavy, his body aching. But as he looked around, a sense of relief washed over him. They were safe. For now, at least. He knew this wouldn't be the last battle he would face, but it was the first victory in a long time. As he made his way back to Sarah, he could see her waiting for him on the porch, her eyes full of fear and hope. She had been waiting for him to return, and now, as he approached, she saw the relief in his eyes. Samuel didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence between them spoke volumes. They had both been through so much, and now, they were finally free. As Samuel reached her side, he took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. They didn't need words. They had each other, and for the first time in a long while, they could finally look to the future. It wasn't perfect, and there were still dangers lurking out there, but together, they could face whatever came next. And for Samuel, that was enough. The past had been a storm, but they had weathered it together. And now, with Sarah by his side, he knew they could build something new, something stronger than the darkness that had once surrounded them. Together, they would face the future, one step at a time.